All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are going to get started. Thanks for joining us today for analyzing student data for instructional grouping. I am Heather Peltier with Education Foundations, and let's jump right into it. All right, so I'll go over our agenda. We're going to move fairly quickly through because we know it's your evening and this is your time. But at any point as we're talking, if you have questions along the way, you can chat them or you can raise your hand in Zoom if you know how to use that feature, or you can also just unmute yourself and go for it, because I know we're a small group. Will be pretty informal. So here's what we're going to cover today. We'll begin with introductions, and then we're going to talk a little bit about instructional grouping in terms of options and philosophies. And then we're going to walk you through a sample data set in terms of how you would analyze the data and use it for instructional grouping, and how you might use it in a couple different ways, depending on what option you've picked and what suits your needs and goals best for instructional grouping. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about data savvy coaching. And we're also going to have some time for some questions. And so we'll jump right into it. I'm Heather Peltier, and I actually began my education career over 20 years ago. I was a teacher and then moved into a coaching role. I've also served as a district level curriculum specialist. When I was a coach, I was a literacy coach. My background was reading English language arts, teaching English learners, and I also taught inclusion for students with disabilities. Then it was really the coaching role actually that got me hooked on data and using data, data-informed instruction. And so I started taking more courses into that, and one thing led to another, and I ended up getting my doctorate. I have my cognate is in educational measurement. My PhD is in curriculum and instruction. And I've served in a variety of roles since then. I've been a psychometrician at the district level. I've also worked for a state Department of Education. I was the chief assessment officer for Tennessee Department of Education. And I have, for the past few years, been working for a private education consulting company. And so I've had the opportunity to do some consulting with different state departments of education, different schools, different districts. And I am really looking forward to getting a chance to work with some instructional coaches. I think that is, that's really where you have such a strong impact on students. Coaches really can have that direct impact on what is going on in the classroom and what happens with the kids. And so that is really where my heart is, and I know Leah's heart as well. And so I will stop talking, Leah, and let you introduce yourself.
I'm Leah Torres, and I was an instructional coach in science and math, and I working with administrators and instructional coaches and teachers and PLs, professional learning communities, to really try to help them use data, and not just as an overview, but really get down to the student level to help them be able to really understand where the gaps are and really accelerate learning. Especially now, since we know that the students have gaps, it's really being very specific with them and, okay, how are they doing on the standard, and how much do they understand, how much background knowledge do they understand, and what do we need to do to get them to where they need to be. So to me, an instructional coach wears a lot of different hats, and they're coaches and they're mentors and they're cheerleaders and they're help to the teachers. And they're just this vital key in between the administration and the teachers that really help, similar to like a football coach would, help the school move forward and understand the subject area and understand the information that's coming to them.
And really our hope is, because we have since had these experiences with data analysis and with using data to drive student achievement, we would love to be able to share some of that information with you all. So well, we wanted to talk really quickly about the data sets that we're going to be using today. So for this demonstration of how to dig into the data. So Leah, I'll let you chat a little bit about
Sure.
that.
So we are usually nationally normed data. We have both used iReady data. We've both used STAR data. We've both used NWEA data. This is similar to an NWEA sample set that we're using today, but all of them are nationally normed. Progress monitoring, they happen 3 times a year. I'm sure you're familiar with the windows where they happen in October or in September, and then in a December, January window, and then an April, May window. We are going to look at grade 3 science and grade 9 algebra. And for this, there is no identifying sample for the students. We used just a really overview sample data set. So that way, if your school district uses iReady or STAR data, it's the same idea. You normally get a score, you'll get some data about the different strands. And that's really where the heart of this lies right now, is when you're looking at the strand data, what information can you do and how can you group students and how well do those strands align with your standards? And what is it telling you about your tier 1 time in MTSS, but also your tier 2 and your tier 3 grouping? And that's really what we are going to be talking about today, but it's a very general overview of data that you've probably seen multiple times in your classrooms and in your school, regardless of what type of test you give.
Right. And so, and for this, so you'll see student data here because we want to show you how it would look like to dig into kids. But it's all dummy, the student names are all, we have a name randomizer that we use, so it's not real data. All right. So we're going to talk about instructional grouping and about using data to drive those instructional groupings. When we think about that, though, there are a couple different options here, a couple ways you can go. Some of it is philosophical, and some of it depends specifically on the goals and also what type of instruction, whether this is core instruction or whether it's a specific group of students that are receiving a specific intervention. And so depending on what your needs are and what your goals are, you might be looking to group students homogeneously. Those students who have the same areas of struggle, so that you can do a specific intervention, or maybe the same areas of achievement, so you can do some enrichment activities with them. And we'll also talk though about some heterogeneous grouping strategies, and that is based on that theory of the zone of proximal development. Leah, do you want to add anything about
Sure.
those?
So what our suggestion is, or what I've done in the past with schools, is really your homogeneous mixtures might be with students who all are struggling with decoding, or students who are all on the same, if you use guided reading in your ELA coach, somebody who has a very similar skill set and are struggling with the same strands. For your tier 1 instruction, your core instructions that you do on grade level, heterogeneous grouping can really help accelerate students because of that place of discourse. So you have separated your students, or you've grouped your students into different groups in the class, and they are reading a text or they are working a problem in math, like finding a common denominator. And when you heterogeneously group, you can have your students who already understand that concept help explain it to the student who maybe doesn't understand it. So you don't have a group of students who none of them will understand the topic. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to solve that problem. When you heterogeneously group, oftentimes 1 or 2 students may have enough background knowledge or enough level of understanding to help the other students. And then through discourse, whether it be math or science or ELA, that discourse can really help actually your tier 2 interventions. So if it's something that the student is struggling on and it's a standard that's a gap standard where they don't understand it, you can really help the students during that tier 1 time understand that standard to help them accelerate sooner. And so that's really where heterogeneous grouping comes into play. And a lot of it has to do with tier 1 instruction. And oftentimes teachers will group based on similar needs instead of looking at, okay, if a student excels in one area and is struggling in another area, let's see how we can group them with other students. So one student's strength and another student's weakness can come together and really work for that student to understand through cognitive dissonance. And so it's really one of those places. I was a science teacher, and I remember the first time I tried it out because I wasn't really sure if this was going to work. I had learned about it, and I had a student, and she was one of my students who had a better level of understanding in science. And we were looking at this formative assessment question that asked, where is the sun located in the solar system? And she told the other students, the sun is not between the earth and the moon. Everybody would burn. She was so adamant about it, and she did it so much better than I could that my students' level of understanding increased almost instantaneously. And it didn't take my lecture. It didn't take me drawing a chart. It didn't take me making them memorize something. It was another student explaining to them that was like, the sun is much bigger than the earth or the moon, and we would all die. And that was really where I began to understand this grouping, where sometimes students can do the explaining at their level that they can understand better.
And so when we dig into this data set, you're going to see us looking at grouping at the sub-score or the standard level, depending on what type of assessment you're using. Sometimes you might be using a district developed assessment. You might have, one of the nationally normed progress monitoring assessments. You will get data at different levels of granularity. So you might have it at the specific standard level. You might have it at a higher level. It might be a domain or a group of standards. And so we're going to talk about digging into that a little bit. And we'll do that when we walk through the student data file that we're going to look at today. And then the other thing that we're going to talk a little bit about is grouping students within a class or grouping students across classes based on teacher strengths. And again, this will depend on your goals, as well as really the setup of your school, the type of relationships that your teachers have with each other, the amount of common planning time, and your ability to organize something like that. As to whether grouping students across classes is possible, I was working with a school district in Utah where they actually do group the students across classes based on teacher strengths, and it works really well. They're a very high achieving school. It's done wonders in terms of their student growth and student performance. But that may or may not be an option. And I know, Leah, that's something that you have used as well with certain schools, yes, is working with them to group across classes.
We were able to do it in two different ways. We had a science group that was able to flexibly group, where based on the science teacher's strengths, they were able to move students, whether that were struggling in that subject area, move it with a teacher who that was their strength. And then that way they could work on those topics, and the teacher had a comfortability level with it. And then the students were able to understand as well.
All right. So Leah, I'm now going to hand it over to you. Let me actually pause sharing and see if I can make you the presenter really quickly, because Leah is actually going to walk through the file, the student data file, and we're going to show how you could do some of these things. All right. Leah, I'm changing you to host.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I am going to start with my Algebra 1 data. And this is really very generalized data that is very much math standards that you will see across the board. So if you are a K-1-2 coach, then you'll see something similar. Obviously, the topics are harder as they get up, but you're going to see very similar headings. And then we'll move on to a science data set.
Right. And the science one is elementary. So we're trying to get just a range so you could see how this could be a couple ways.
And so for my math data, I am working with 9th grade algebra, and you'll notice here that they'll give the standard. And that's really the starting point when we are talking about a data set. Yes, we'll get a scale score, and yes, that scale score may be tied to how the students are proficient on a test, what is their expectation on a standardized test, maybe at your state level, but that's not the place to necessarily go for grouping. What you're really going to want to do is go to the standard, possibly the scale score, but go to the score level where they have marked out where the students are at. Are they right on grade level? Are they below grade level on that standard? Or are they above grade level on that standard? So in this case in algebra, we have number sense, and we have a normal algebra class, and we can start sorting and filtering based on that. Now, part of coaching is how well can I explain my data to my students? And the other half of it is if my administrator gives me an Excel spreadsheet, how well am I going to be able to manipulate this to do what I need to do to take it to my PLCs? So what I have done is I've set up a filter in Excel, and it goes across the top, and this way I can mix and match students accordingly. So one thing that you can do is something that jumps out to me always when I am doing grouping is that a student is probably not across the board. And you're going to see it more as we go through after COVID, because depending on where the students left the school, they came back to school, were they digital? There may be gaps just based on that. So they'll excel in one topic or one strand or one standard, and then they may be struggling for no fault of their own. They may be struggling because they were quarantined, they were digital. It was a struggle for understanding that at that time. And so you're going to see this probably across the board more now than ever. So in this case, you have a student who is at the average level for number sense, but in algebraic reasoning is high average, and then average in geometric reasoning, low average in data analysis. So when we're talking about as we go through our normal math curriculum in Algebra 1, when you are doing small groups, this student who is low average in this may end up being placed with a different student who is average during your heterogeneous mixing, in your heterogeneous grouping. And so during this time, as you are going through it, and as you're helping your teachers go through it, you look at their classes and you say, okay, let's not put all of the students who are low together. Let's not make it so that all of the students who are struggling with data analysis are going to struggle through every example I give them. Let's mix up our group some, so we have some students who are low, some students who are low average, and some students who are average, all working together on a problem. And when you do that, you're able to really change the dynamic of the group. You're able to change the conversation of the group. And you're able to also, not every student is going to struggle in the same thing. So they're not always with the same partners every time you group. And so there's a diversification. They actually can build a classroom community, there are all these pluses to this changing of how you group as you go through the topics. And so when you're talking about tier 1 instruction, it can be key that you make sure that the teachers understand, just because a student has a scale score over here that is maybe low, doesn't mean they're low in necessarily everything. And so that's something to talk to the PLCs about. Now, if you're really at a place in your school where you have stronger PLCs and they're able to flexibly group, you're able to kind of bring it up a notch. And you're able to say, okay, on certain days or in certain times, or however your PLC agrees to work with this, everybody who during your intervention time who is struggling with one portion of algebra, it could be something like fractions, where students have always struggled with fractions. And so giving them algebraic fractions that are on grade level work, but very specific to algebra and very specific to that gap, and you work together with one teacher, and then another teacher takes another strand, and another teacher takes another strand during an intervention time. And then the teacher's strengths can really help move the students. So that would be more of a homogeneous grouping, where everybody is looking at their own personal strengths as teachers and how to reach out. So what you can do, normally what I do is I just sort and filter, and I group in that manner. So I'll put on my filter and I'll say, okay, these students are high average, these students are average, and these students are low average. Okay, what are they all struggling at for this algebraic reasoning? And it might be different that I said, then they're struggling on number sense, or they're struggling in geometric reasoning. So even though you're homogeneously mixing your students, it's not going to really affect who they are working with. They won't always be with the same students every time. So that is our example in math, and I will go on to science data, where you can go to your subgroup, and maybe you have teachers who are better in earth science, or better in physical science, or better in life science. And again, you can group by strengths and weaknesses. So if you sort, you'll see that these students, some of these students,
Hey, Leah.
The status set. Yes.
Leah, you're still displaying the algebra one.
Oh, I thought no, I think I'm on science. Am I on?
Okay, what's showing on my screen is algebra.
Oh, okay. I
think you might be projecting from a different.
Yes. Let me
different monitor. Drag it on over.
Let me drag it on over. I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to reshare. I apologize for that. Yep, here it goes. It was on my screen and it wasn't on yours. So there you go. All right. So when you filter it, you'll see the student excels in earth space, but struggles more in life. Whereas this student is better in physical science than they are in life science and earth space science. So it's really gauging those student needs by the classes. And then if you have a teacher, if you are in a middle school or an elementary school where you have a teacher who maybe enjoys life science more, taking the students who are struggling in life science and having a flexible grouping time, not every day, 1 or 2 days a week, and really being able to home in on the standards that the student is struggling with. And so it can go in class, or it can go in flexible grouping outside of the classes.
And one of the things to think about, I know when you're thinking about elementary science in particular, depending on how your elementary school is structured. So some elementary schools I've worked with are departmentalized. So you have teachers who specialize in science, but the majority are cross-disciplinary. And so many of those teachers have a general K-6 licensure and certification. And so there may very well be some strands of science that those teachers are weaker in or less comfortable with teaching. And so having this type of grouping, if your schedule allows for it, can be really beneficial, both to the students and to the teachers.
Absolutely. And we have seen a lot of success with this over the years. Recently, we did this with one of our 5th grade sciences. And at that time, we had a teacher who really enjoyed life science, and we had a teacher who really enjoyed earth space science. And so one day a week, they had flexibly grouped to help get the students ready, because the state where I was working at has a 5th grade science test. And so we really saw an improvement in scores with this flexible grouping. But even in a classroom, if you are doing stations or centers or small group instruction, you can start grouping the students in 2 different ways to really maximize their learning. And it's a way to accelerate students. I know that is something that is said a lot in currently post-COVID, is accelerated student learning. But really, it's a way where it takes, depending on how you group the students, it actually takes some of the work off of the teachers, because through student discourse, the students will be able to help each other understand the learning and construct the learning, and then move forward with that new learning. And so it's a way that just during core instruction, students are able to build their knowledge and accelerate their learning through a conversation. It might be during bell work. It might be during a lab environment in science. It might be during math discourse or an ELA discourse with each other, where you're grouping students who understand one strand with students who are slightly struggling on that strand. And moving forward with that information, they can really build and bridge the gaps.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen again. Oh, can you make me the host again?
Sure.
Sorry. Thank you. All right. And so we wanted to, before we jump into some questions, any questions that you may have, we want to talk a little bit about Data Savvy Coaching, which is a new program that we are launching. It's brand new. So we're in beta version still. And we'll be reaching out to you over the next couple of days to share a little bit more information about this. It's a charter membership opportunity. So we're really looking for coaches that can partner with us and that really are interested in partnering with us to help develop a whole and complete resource library and training for data analysis that is useful and relevant and impactful for instructional coaches specifically. So what this includes, the Data Savvy Coaching, is we currently have a resource library. Right now it has in it some content. It has things like templates for data walls, different ways to look at and visualize your data, some PLC data how-tos, templates that you can use for looking at your data within your PLCs. It's got some live and some on-demand trainings, and we're looking to expand that a little bit more, actually a lot more, as we get some feedback and input from some of the charter members. It's weekly open office hours. So we'll be having office hours at different times throughout the week to really have a chance where coaches can come in and talk to us about your data and any problems that you're seeing, or get any suggestions or guidance at all that we can give, any support that we can offer, because our background is so specialized in terms of this data analysis. And then coach-led resource and training development. So as I mentioned earlier, we're looking for coaches to partner with us to let us know what you need, and then we would develop additional resources and additional training to make sure that this content is something that really works for you. And the last piece that's going to be part of this is that there's an online course that we have already developed. It's Excel for educational data analysis. As Leah mentioned, kind of there are a couple different facets to being a coach. And one of them is the knowledge about data, that understanding of it, and really how to dig into data, what it means, how to use it. But then there's also the technical side. And that's really where you get that data power in terms of, can I manipulate my data? Can I pull down and merge files? So, suppose my district gives me a file, or my student information system gives me a file where I can pull student test scores, but there's a completely different file that has my behavioral data, my referrals, or my attendance data, or maybe more of the demographic data. And I want to merge some of these files together. So in this course, we give the technical skills that show you how to do that, so that you don't have to rely on someone else to pull that for you. And you also don't have to spend hours of your own time copying and pasting information. We show you some really easy tips and tricks for how to manipulate those data files so that you can look at them in the way that really is relevant and meaningful for you. So we'll be contacting you about that. It's actually opening. It's going to be opening this evening. Will be an early open. For people who've attended the webinar and who signed up in advance for early notice. So we'll be contacting you about that, and we hope that you all are interested in joining us. We're very excited about this. All right, so we're wondering if anyone has any questions. I know I put in the chat box, go ahead and chat any questions that you're having. But also, if you would like, so you can either do that or you can unmute yourself if there are any questions at all. Oh, okay. I see something's coming through the chat. No questions so far. Okay. All right. Well, here's our contact information. And so if any questions come up, please feel free to reach out to us. We've got our email. We have a Facebook group that we've started. It's the Data Analysis Coaching for Educators. We're going to be posting this recorded video in there. And we'll also be posting more resources and information as we get those. And we also have our website. So keep in touch and let us know if you think of something.
Yes. And Janice had a question. Yes, Janice. We know that different schools have different resources and different hierarchies. So if you want to sign up because you might be a teacher leader, you may not have a math coach. I know a lot of school districts have literacy coaches, but unofficial math coaches that may be department heads or PLC leads. That is completely fine. We are well aware that larger districts often have more resources and have more non-classroom instructional staff. And then some of your smaller schools may only have one person that is really responsible for ELA and math, and other subjects areas may not even have a coach. And so you are welcome to ask questions and participate in it. It's not all school districts and schools are the same, and we absolutely realize that. And we're really just here to help you and help give you support that we've learned through the years and templates to make your life and your time easier, because nobody wants to reinvent the wheel a lot of times when we're doing coaching.
Right. Yes. We know absolutely that there are plenty of people wearing hats. So really the whole point of the data savvy coaching is for anyone who wears that hat of, I work with student data and I'm trying to use this to have data informed instruction at my school, whether that's at the whole school level. And, you might have a title like Dean of Students. You might be a load-bearing teacher who is a department chair. And this is really your niche and your area of expertise. But yes, absolutely. We would love to have anyone who's interested in using student data to improve instruction. All right, it looks like there's another. All right, yay. All right. Well, as we said, if any other questions come up, please reach out to us. We are here and we will be contacting you shortly. And we'll also send out the recorded video of this, a link for how you can access it. So thank you again so much for your time. We know it's the evening and this is your personal time. So we're so happy that you spent it with us. We're very appreciative. Thanks, everyone.